Hello F1 fans! Welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with myself Harry, Vasco and David. And today we'll be discussing the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend.
Starting with practice 1, and we saw a lot of new faces during the first practice session, and it was only normal, I think, as there was only a battle for the second place in the Constructors' Championship, and a few of the places were not sure what is going to happen at the driver standings, but I think it was logical that most of the teams gave their cars to some young F1 drivers. There were 10 of these drivers: Felipe Drugovich, Robert Schwartzman, Vesti, Doohan, Pourchaire, Pato Ward, Dennis, Hader, O'Sullivan and Bierman. And George Russell won the first practice, but I think it's great when we see these young, full of energy drivers ready to have their first practice with an F1 car.
And mention in practice Sainz's big crash, which potentially cost him in qualifying as Ferrari failed to really set up his car in time for qualifying. And speaking of qualifying, we'll move on to it. Logan Sargent had 2 deleted laps in Q1 and he got dead last. Carlos Sainz, also the big surprise, was eliminated in Q1. Lewis Hamilton was knocked out in Q2, setting up a really interesting constructors battle between Ferrari and Mercedes. And going into Q3, we had Perez's lap deleted, which meant that he finished P9. Yuki Tsunoda had a really impressive P6 as he tried to single-handedly overcome that deficit to Williams. But at the front, we had Max Verstappen taking pole position, Charles Leclerc on the front row of the grid, and Oscar Piastri rounding out the top 3.
And moving on to the race recap, the podium finishers were Max Verstappen in first place, Charles Leclerc in second place 18 seconds behind, and George Russell in third place 20 seconds behind. And I think we had Carlos Sainz as a DNF as he pitted the lap before the end and he was not classified as a finisher.
Probably that is why, because of every other race in Abu Dhabi, there were safety cars, DNFs. That is why Ferrari opted for that strange, unknown, really bizarre strategy, which made Carlos Sainz in the end, he didn't even finish the race, and they opted for that, but it wasn't worth the risk, and that even costed them the second place in the championship.
Yeah, Carlos Sainz's strategy it made no sense. It never made any sense, really, especially I see him making his first pit stop and he puts on the hards again, and I was like, this race is over for Ferrari and for Carlos Sainz because they're going nowhere. Your main strategy going into this race cannot be, let's hope a safety car comes out to bail us out. That is not how you should strategize. You're starting lower down the field. You have to think of a strategy that will move up Carlos Sainz without a safety car, because safety cars don't happen all the time, and you shouldn't expect a safety car because that's not really a normal thing to happen. But overall, I guess standard Ferrari strategy.
And although there was nothing working in Ferrari, even the first lap of Charles Leclerc, I think he deserves a praise for all the work he has done and his thinking during the race about strategy and all that stuff. I think both pilots of Ferrari are the good example there, and they're the only good thing right now happening at Ferrari after another disappointing season. Although Leclerc couldn't overtake Verstappen in the first lap, we saw glimpses of his great performances. And moving on to the other pilots, let's move to George Russell and what happened with his race. He took third position.
Yeah, this was quite surprising for me. George Russell finished the season off on a high, and when compared to Lewis Hamilton especially and his results in the last 3 races, I think that George Russell actually has found some good form. Let's see if he continues on in the beginning of next season. Nevertheless, he had a bad start in the race. He was overtaken by Lando Norris and he was behind both McLarens, but then he had a great battle with Oscar Piastri, during which there were 2 occasions in the same corner where he tried to pass around the outside, but he turned too wide and Piastri gained the position back. And then third time lucky, George actually managed to overtake him.
Yeah, I was really impressed with George Russell's races. First podium since Spain and second for the season, capping off a miserable season for him on a high, at least considering all of the mediocre results he's had throughout it. But moving on, we had some more interesting battles further down the field involving Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, who had a really interesting incident where Lewis was catching up to Fernando and Fernando just hits the brakes before the braking zone. Obviously, from what I saw, it seemed like Alonso just wanted to get DRS and wanted to let Lewis through, but it was still quite dangerous and quite unnatural to do something like that, and I was actually surprised that he got away with no penalty during that situation.
If there was another pilot, I think he would have tried to overtake Fernando, and after that he would have fallen actually in his trap with that, and there wouldn't be such a big problem with this brake check. But the second most experienced driver in Lewis Hamilton, I think he's never going to fall for this, and it was really close to be an ugly situation. If there was that ugly situation, actually it would have worked like amazingly for Ferrari, but Lewis knows what to do, and we saw it. He didn't crush it, Fernando, and everything was without any problems in the end, which was like, okay, everything is good for Aston Martin, for Mercedes.
Yeah, but we have to also consider the instance with Gasly, where Gasly just decided to brake like in the middle of the corner, and Lewis was not prepared for that, and he had a little bit of damage to his front wing. But I think it was not significant, as he managed to finish the race in one piece, and it was all fine.
And what about the Perez and Norris incident? It was another strange incident, strange penalty giving, another inconsistent decision from FIA. We saw that throughout the whole season, and we saw it like one last time for the season.
Yeah, very weird situation indeed. I was surprised for the penalty, considering that Perez didn't even gain the place on Norris. Norris kept the position. I didn't see why there was a penalty if he doesn't take the position. Usually, if Perez would have taken the place, then yes, a penalty is absolutely justified. But Perez didn't take the place, so I'm confused why he got that penalty, and that in the end turned out to be a major penalty for the Constructors' Championship, as it basically sealed it for Mercedes. But moving on, we had a really interesting fight towards the end. Well, really interesting, debatably really interesting, but we had Sergio Perez catching up to George Russell and Charles Leclerc, and he had that 5-second penalty, which really made things difficult for him. He got past Russell pretty easily, which I was very surprised about, and then caught up to Leclerc, and Leclerc let him through with the idea to allow Perez to build as big of a gap as possible and stay ahead 5 seconds of Russell. But it turned out to be unsuccessful, as Russell finished 1.1 seconds within those 5 seconds, and therefore kept this podium and kept Mercedes second in the Constructors.
Yeah, I think the penalty was quite controversial, even from my point of view. Even though I'm a Mercedes fan, I think that maybe it shouldn't have been given, and I know that it would have meant a Ferrari P2 in the Constructors, but still we have to, play according to the rules.
Yeah, we all want fair game. That's the only thing I want. No matter what team we support, I think we want fair game. And that is wrap up of the last race of the season. Let's move to the fun rubric and our highlight of the weekend. David?
Yeah, my highlight of the weekend. The season is over. It's finally over. No more Max Verstappen dominance. Finally a rest. This is my highlight of the weekend, considering how bad this race was actually. It was really boring, but yeah, the season is over.
No more Verstappen dominance for at least another 96 days.
Let a person enjoy themselves.
Well, we'll wait for the next season for sure. I cannot wait to be started. But yeah, 96 days. My highlight was that Yuki Tsunoda led the race for the first time in his career, and he actually led the race for as many laps as Fernando Alonso throughout the whole season. Amazing. Yeah, that race was boring. Most of the races throughout the season were boring, but still, I like Yuki Tsunoda, and the fact that he led the race, it was cool for me.
My highlight of the weekend was the Mercedes P2, because I'm really satisfied with that, even though it was achieved in a rather controversial manner, as I already spoke about it. Moving on, surprise and disappointment of the weekend. I'll start by saying that my surprise is George Russell, as I did not expect such a quality performance from him. And my disappointment is Lewis Hamilton. As I already said, I did not expect such a bad ending to the season, and I hope he actually picks up the pace during the first races of 2024.
My surprise is the Mercedes P2. I didn't expect them on the podium this weekend, and although Lewis didn't have the best race, actually they managed to secure the most important thing, that P2 in Constructors' Championship, and overall their season was not the best, but still, when they had to perform, they performed. And I cannot say that about Ferrari. Throughout the whole season, they had better car than Mercedes, they had better car than Aston Martin, they had better car than McLaren. But in the end of the season, they're ending it in P3, and although the only win that is not in Red Bull's hands throughout the whole season was Ferrari's, I think that is not enough. Ferrari have everything. They have the history, they have the money, they have two amazing pilots in Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, but nothing seems to be in the right place for them. And that is why they're my disappointment, not only of the whole weekend, but throughout the whole season and throughout the last few seasons, because they underperform, and not just underperform, they underperform massively.
My surprise and disappointment of the weekend is kind of a combination between what you guys said, but my surprise, George Russell, considering the season he had great pace in that race, overtook both McLarens and they didn't close up to him once, kept a well-deserved podium. And my disappointment was Carlos Sainz, because he had just a horrendous weekend. Out in Q1, he made no progress during the race. Horrible strategy, although that is down to Ferrari. And at the end of the day, his car was the reason that Ferrari couldn't get P2 in the Constructors. Leclerc did the maximum. He got P2 in that race. Carlos Sainz just needed to score a few points and he still couldn't manage that. But now we'll move on to our reactions to our predictions for the final race of the season. And Harry, you were the only one that managed to get P2 in the Constructors right, as me and Vasco both predicted Ferrari.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, even though it was not the best case scenario. I mean, I wanted it to be as fair as possible, but still, I'll take the points. The drivers' predictions were awful for all of us. We had 0 out of 12.
Yeah, really disappointing. And I already said what I think about Ferrari, but in the end of the season, I cannot believe that not a single one of us was able to get at least one of the places. These are 12 predictions for 4 places. Like, we're magicians.
Thank you guys for listening to our episodes throughout the season. But even though there are no races left, we will be making more and more episodes, special episodes about different topics. So stay tuned for that. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you. And remember, if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.